The classroom was empty except for two people when Kwon Sang-hoon walked in 15 minutes late to his daughter's parent-teacher conference, a habit he hated in himself and couldn't seem to break. Not when 3 warehouse shipments and a supplier dispute had eaten his entire afternoon. "Mr. Kwon?" the teacher said, rising from behind a small desk covered in children's drawings. Her back still turned as she gathered a folder. "I was starting to think you weren't coming. Your daughter Ha-eun did wonderful work on her." She turned around. Sang-hoon stopped in the doorway, every carefully maintained muscle in his face going still. Her. 7 years. 7 years, and he'd built an entire private investigation unit around finding this exact woman. And here she was, standing in a kindergarten classroom in a cardigan the color of rust, holding a folder of 6-year-old's finger paintings, looking at him with the polite, faintly puzzled expression of someone meeting a stranger for the first time. "Mr. Kwon?" she said again, uncertain now, noting his silence. "Is everything all right?" He didn't know how to answer that. Nothing had been all right, in the specific way that mattered, since a rainy night 7 years ago in a Busan noodle shop that had closed 20 minutes earlier, when a stranger with tired eyes and a quiet laugh had sat across from him for 3 hours and made him feel, for the first time in his adult life, like an ordinary man instead of a name people whispered in 3 port cities. He had never gotten her name. He'd been called away, urgently, mid-sentence, a call he couldn't ignore. Not that night, not in his world, and by the time he'd returned, she was gone. No number. No name. Just the ghost of a conversation he'd replayed in his head more times than he could count, and a folded napkin with half a phone number smudged into illegibility by the rain. He had looked for her, quietly, for 7 years, in the disciplined, methodical way he looked for anything that mattered to him. And now, she was standing in front of him wearing a laminated name badge that read Miss Destiny Carter Kindergarten, Room 4B, and she had no idea who he was. "Mr. Kwon," Destiny said a third time, setting the folder down, concern replacing puzzlement now. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Something like that. "I'm sorry," he said finally, forcing his voice into something steady. Something that didn't betray 7 years collapsing into this one impossible moment. "Long day. You were saying about Ha-eun's work?" Destiny studied him a moment longer, clearly unconvinced but too professional to push. Then gestured to the small chair across from her desk, comically undersized for a man of his height. A detail he registered distantly, from somewhere far away from the actual crisis unfolding in his chest. He sat. "Ha-eun is remarkable," Destiny said, sliding a drawing across the desk, a careful, earnest crayon rendering of a man and a little girl standing beside what appeared to be a very large dog neither of them owned. "Bright, kind to the other children, though she can be quite guarded sometimes. Private, almost for a 6-year-old. She paused, studying him with the particular perceptiveness Sang-hoon remembered now, viscerally, from that rain-soaked noodle shop. "Given what I understand about her circumstances, that you adopted her after your sister passed, that guardedness makes a great deal of sense." Sang-hoon's jaw tightened. Even the mention of his sister, 3 years gone now, still landed like a blow he hadn't fully learned to absorb. "She talks about you constantly, though," Destiny continued, softer now, a small, genuine smile breaking through her professional composure. "Uncle Sang-hoon this, Uncle Sang-hoon that. She drew you 14 times this semester." I counted. She tapped the drawing between them. "Whatever you're doing at home, Mr. Kwon, it's working. She feels safe with you. That matters more than any test score I could show you today." Sang-hoon looked down at his own crude, crayon-rendered face on the page round, smiling, holding his niece's hand beside an enormous imaginary dog, and felt something crack open in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the impossible, vertiginous coincidence of the woman sitting across from him. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, "how long have you been teaching here?" 4 years, Destiny said. "Why? 4 years. 3 years too late, and yet somehow, impossibly, not too late at all." "No reason," he said. I feel like we may have met before." Something flickered across Destiny's face, a faint, searching hesitation. gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I don't think so, she said slowly. I think I'd remember. You did, he thought, the words rising in his throat and refusing to come out. You just don't know it's me. He had spent 7 years and considerable resources trying to find a woman whose name he'd never learned. And now she was sitting 3 feet away from him, holding his daughter's drawings. Completely unaware that the stranger from that rainy Busan noodle shop was sitting in a child-sized chair across her desk, trying to decide whether telling her the truth would feel like a miracle to her, or like something far more frightening. Before we go any further, welcome back if you're a regular here, and if this is your first time, I'm so glad you found this story. Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one, and I love seeing exactly how far this community stretches. Now, quick warning before we continue. What Song-hoon finds out about Destiny is going to completely change how you see everything that's happened so far. And the choice he has to make by the end of this story? I promise you, it is not the choice you're expecting. If you've ever wondered what it actually costs a dangerous man to protect the people he loves, stay with me. Because this one earns every second of your time. Hit subscribe now if you don't want to miss how this ends. Okay, let's go back to that classroom. Song-hoon left the parent-teacher conference in a daze, his driver waiting curbside with the engine running, and sat in the back seat of his car for nearly 10 minutes without giving a single instruction. Sir? His driver finally asked, glancing back through the mirror. Where to? Give me a moment, Sang-hoon said, staring at the crayon drawing still clutched in his hand himself. Ha-eun, an imaginary dog, drawn by a 6-year-old who had no idea her art teacher had just detonated 7 years of careful, methodical searching in the span of a single conversation. He needed to think. He needed to be certain. He called Jung Hae-won, the head of his private security and investigations division, the same woman who had spent portions of the last 7 years quietly running down every lead Song-hoon had ever handed her about a nameless American woman from a rainy night in Busan. Sir, Hae-won answered on the second ring. Is everything all right? You almost never call outside business hours. I need you to run a name, Sang-hoon said. Destiny Carter. Kindergarten teacher, Seoul Foreign Academy, Room 4B. There was a pause on the line, the particular silence of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about tonight's schedule. Sir, is this related to the search? The Busan woman? I think it might be her, Sang-hoon said, and even saying it out loud felt dangerous, fragile, like speaking too loudly might make it untrue. I'll have a preliminary file within the hour, Hae-won said, already moving. He could hear it in her voice. Sir, if I may ask, are you certain? 7 years is a long time. Faces change. Memory plays tricks. I'm certain, Song-hoon said, and he was. He'd spent 7 years trying to forget a face he'd only seen for 3 hours by candlelight in a closed noodle shop, and he had never once succeeded. The file arrived 40 minutes later, delivered personally by Hae-won to his home office, where Song-hoon sat across from Ha-yoon's homework spread out on the coffee table, only half paying attention as his niece narrated, at great length, the plot of a cartoon involving a heroic hedgehog. Destiny Carter, Hae-won said quietly, once Ha-yoon had wandered off to find a snack. 31 years old. Originally from Savannah, Georgia, moved to Seoul 4 years ago on a teaching contract with Seoul Foreign Academy. No criminal record. No significant debts. Unmarried, she paused, watching Song-hoon's face carefully. Sir, there's something else. What? Hae-won slid a printed itinerary across the table, an old visa record, dated 7 years and 2 months ago. She was in Busan for 11 days on a layover work visa. Sir, teaching certification exam postponement, weather delay. The dates match. She was there the same week as the noodle shop. Song-hoon stared at the document, something in his chest tightening painfully around a certainty he'd been afraid to fully claim until this exact moment. It's her, he said quietly. It appears so, sir, Hae-won said carefully. What would you like to do? That was the question, wasn't it? 7 years of searching had never actually required him to answer it. Because the searching itself had been the entire project, a way of holding on to something without ever having to risk actually finding it. Now the finding was complete, unexpected and impossible, delivered not through any of his careful investigative channels, but through his own niece's kindergarten classroom. Nothing, for now, Sang-hoon said slowly. I need to think. Hae-won studied him a moment longer, something almost sympathetic, crossing her usually composed expression. Sir, if I may say something outside my role, go ahead. You've spent 7 years looking for this woman, Hae-won said. I've watched you turn down introductions, avoid arranged meetings your mother tried to organize, dismiss every woman our associates suggested. All while quietly funding a search most men would have abandoned after the first year. Whatever you're afraid of right now, sir, I don't think nothing is actually an option anymore. Sang-hoon didn't answer, but he didn't dismiss it either. That night, after Ha-yun had fallen asleep, he sat alone in his study with the crayon drawing propped against a stack of shipping contracts. Staring at his own cartoonish face rendered in blue and orange, and thought about the particular danger of what he was considering. Destiny Carter didn't know who he was. Not really. She knew Kwon Sang-hoon, businessman, guardian of a bright, guarded 6-year-old, a man who showed up 15 minutes late to conferences because of warehouse disputes. She had no idea that the same hands that had, hours ago, accepted her gentle praise about his parenting, had also, over the years, signed off on decisions that kept 3 port cities worth of dangerous men in careful, violent order. If he told her the truth, all of it, not just the noodle shop, but everything that came after there, was a real possibility she would look at him the way most people looked at him once they understood fully who he was. Not with warmth, not with the easy, unguarded laughter he remembered from that rainy night. With fear, or worse. With the particular cold calculation of someone deciding how quickly they could remove themselves from his orbit. And if he said nothing, if he simply continued being Ha-yun's guardian, showing up to conferences, keeping his distance, protecting the fragile miracle of having found her at all, by never actually claiming it, he would spend the rest of his life 3 feet away from the answer to 7 years of searching, forever unable to reach for it. His phone buzzed. A text from Hae-won. Hae-won, one more thing, sir. I pulled her employment file more thoroughly. She requested Ha-eun's class specifically 2 months ago, after a scheduling reshuffle. Her request cited interest in the student's background. I don't believe that's standard procedure. Sang-hoon read the message twice, something shifting uneasily in his chest. She requested Ha-eun's class. Specifically, which meant one of 2 things. Either Destiny Carter had recognized something familiar in his niece's file, a last name, a photograph, some detail connecting back to a night she remembered as clearly as he did. Or she already knew exactly who he was, and had been waiting, just as carefully as he had, for the right moment to find out if he remembered her too. Sang-hoon didn't sleep that night. He sat with Hae-won's message until nearly 3 in the morning, turning the possibility over from every angle, before finally deciding on the only path that felt honest enough to survive whatever came next. He would ask her directly. Not through investigators, not through carefully engineered coincidences. Just a question, asked plainly, the way he should have found the courage to ask 7 years ago before a phone call had stolen his chance. He requested a second meeting the following week, citing a follow-up conversation about Ha-yun's reading progress a thin excuse. And he suspected, watching Destiny's expression when he proposed it, that she suspected as much too. They met after school hours this time, the classroom empty of children, late afternoon light slanting gold through the windows onto rows of small, tidy desks. Mr. Kwon, Destiny said, settling into her chair across from him. I have to admit, Ha-yun's reading progress seems like an unusual reason for a second meeting so soon after the first. It is, Sang-hoon admitted. He'd rehearsed several versions of this conversation the night before, in the quiet of his study, and abandoned every single one of them as either too clinical or too revealing. In the end, he decided the truth, delivered plainly, was the only version that felt right. Miss Carter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the question seems strange. Destiny's expression shifted, wariness creeping in at the edges. All right. 7 years ago, Sang-hoon said slowly, were you in Busan? In November. A rainstorm. A noodle shop, closed for the evening, though the owner let two strangers stay anyway, because neither of us had anywhere else to go. The color drained slowly from Destiny's face. "How do you know about that?" she said quietly, her voice tight, controlled in the particular way of someone trying very hard not to let something enormous show on her face. "Because I was there," Sang-hoon said. "I was the man across the table. I never got your name. I was called away, urgently, before I could ask, and by the time I came back, you were gone." Destiny sat very still, staring at him like she was seeing him for the first time, not Kwon Sang-hoon, guardian, parent, businessman, but someone entirely different underneath that familiar face. "That's not possible," she said finally, though her voice had lost its earlier conviction. "The man I met that night, he wasn't." She stopped herself. "Wasn't what?" Sang-hoon asked, though he already suspected the answer. "He wasn't wealthy," Destiny said carefully. "He wasn't important. He was just a tired, lonely stranger who talked to me for 3 hours like I was the only interesting person left in the world. And then he vanished. And I spent months afterward wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, because there was no way to find him again." She looked at Sang-hoon directly now, something raw and unguarded breaking through her professional composure for the first time since he'd met her as Ha-yoon's teacher. "You're telling me that man was you? The same man who has a driver and a niece he adopted after unspecified family circumstances, and an entire private investigation team apparently capable of tracking down a kindergarten teacher's visa records." Sang-hoon's stomach dropped. "You knew Hae-won looked into you?" "I run background checks on my own occasionally, Mr. Kwon," Destiny said, something sharper entering her voice now. "When a parent starts looking at me the way you did in that first meeting, and then a very well-dressed woman starts asking my colleagues oddly specific questions about my visa history, I notice." She stood, putting distance between them, arms crossed. "Who are you? Really? Because I've spent 4 years hearing things about the Kwon name in this city that I chose to ignore because it wasn't my business. But if that man from Busan is actually you, I think it's time you told me exactly what kind of business you're actually in." Sang-hoon felt the moment arrive, the one he'd been circling all night. The one he'd known would eventually demand an answer he couldn't soften. "I run shipping and logistics operations across 3 port cities," he said carefully. "Officially, that's the truth. Unofficially," he paused, choosing his words with the precision of a man who understood exactly how much this admission could cost him. "Unofficially, a significant portion of what moves through those ports moves because of arrangements I control, some of which exist outside legal boundaries. I am not a businessman who occasionally bends rules, Miss Carter. I am the reason certain rules in 3 cities don't apply to the people I protect." Destiny's face went carefully blank. The particular stillness of someone processing something enormous while trying not to let panic take over. "You're saying," she said slowly, "that the man I talked to for 3 hours in a noodle shop, the man who made me laugh so hard I nearly cried, who listened to me talk about my entire life like it actually mattered to him, that man runs organized crime?" "Yes," Sang-hoon said simply. There was no version of this conversation where softening the truth would help either of them. Destiny was quiet for a long moment, staring at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, not quite fear, not quite anger, something more complicated churning beneath her composed exterior. "And Ha-in," she said finally. "Does she know what her guardian actually does?" "No," Sang-hoon said. "She knows I run shipping companies. She knows I love her more than anything else in this world. She does not know the rest, and I intend to keep it that way for as long as I possibly can." "That's not an answer that makes me feel better, Mr. Kwon," Destiny said quietly. "I know," he admitted. "I'm not trying to make you feel better. I'm trying to be honest with you, because you asked me directly, and because I spent 7 years regretting that I never got the chance to be honest with you the first time." He paused. "I understand if this changes everything. I understand if you need to request a transfer, distance yourself, treat this the way any reasonable person would treat discovering that a dangerous stranger has been sitting across from them in a kindergarten classroom. Destiny studied him for a long, silent moment, something working behind her eyes that Sang-hoon couldn't fully interpret. "I'm not transferring," she said finally, surprising him. "Ha-eun is one of the best students I've ever taught, and she deserves consistency regardless of whatever complicated feelings I'm currently having about her guardian." She sat back down slowly, though the distance between them, physical and otherwise, remained carefully maintained. "But I need time, Miss Kwon. I need to figure out what to actually do with the fact that the man I never stopped thinking about for 7 years turned out to be someone I probably should be afraid of." "That's fair," Sang-hoon said quietly. "And I need you to promise me something," Destiny added, her voice firming now. "If I agree to keep talking to you carefully, slowly, without any promises about where this goes, I need to know Ha-eun is safe. Genuinely safe. Not just from outsiders, but from whatever world you're describing bleeding into her life." "She is the most protected person in 3 port cities," Sang-hoon said, and for the first time since the conversation began, something like conviction entered his voice. "I built my entire life around ensuring that danger never touches her. I would burn down everything I've built before I let it reach her." Destiny held his gaze for a long moment, something in her expression softening, just slightly, at the certainty in his voice. "Okay," she said quietly. "Then I think we have a lot more to talk about. Mr. Kwon Sang-hoon," he said. "If we're going to have this conversation honestly, I'd like you to use my actual name." A small, hesitant smile broke through Destiny's careful composure, the first one Sang-hoon had seen since he'd walked into this classroom 15 minutes late, 7 years and one impossible coincidence ago. "Sang-hoon," she repeated slowly, testing the shape of it. "All right. But I'm not making any promises yet." "I'm not asking for any," he said. "Just this conversation. That's enough, for now." 3 weeks passed in careful, deliberate increments: coffee after school pickup, a walk through a nearby park, while Ha-eun played on the swings, conversations that circled slowly closer to trust without either of them rushing what both understood was fragile, complicated ground. Destiny learned things about Sang-hoon's world in careful pieces, delivered honestly whenever she asked, though he was careful never to volunteer more than she requested. She learned about Hae-won, his most trusted lieutenant. She learned about the careful, compartmentalized life he'd built to keep Ha-eun insulated from the parts of his world that required violence, or threat, or the particular cold calculation that had made the Kwon name feared in 3 cities. She never asked him to stop being who he was. She asked him, instead, harder questions: whether he believed he could change, whether Ha-eun would eventually have to know the truth, whether love, if that's what this eventually became, could survive the weight of everything he carried. He didn't have perfect answers. He gave her honest ones instead. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early spring, everything shifted. Sang-hoon was in his study reviewing shipping manifests when Hae-won burst in without knocking, a violation of protocol so significant that he was on his feet before she'd said a single word. "Sir, it's Ha-eun's school." His blood went cold. What happened? A man matching Choi Yong-sik's description was seen near the school's east entrance during dismissal. Hae-won said, already moving toward the door, gesturing for Sang-hoon to follow. "Security footage confirms it. He was there for 11 minutes before leaving." Sang-hoon felt something ancient and dangerous rise in his chest, the particular fury reserved for threats against the one person in the world he'd sworn absolute protection to. Choi Yong-sik ran a rival organization out of Incheon. A man Sang-hoon had spent the last 2 years locked in careful, tense negotiation with over disputed shipping routes. If Yong-sik's people were circling Ha-eun's school, it wasn't coincidence. It was message sending, the particular brutal language of Sang-hoon's world. "Where is she now?" Sang-hoon demanded, already grabbing his jacket. "Home, sir, with the second security detail, exactly as protocol requires," Hae-won said. "She's safe. But Miss Carter, what about Destiny?" "She was on dismissal duty today, sir, standing at the east entrance during the entire 11-minute window. If Yong-sik's man was scouting the school, he almost certainly saw her too, standing beside your daughter." Sang-hoon's stomach dropped through the floor. He called Destiny immediately, relief crashing through him when she answered on the second ring, her voice steady, unaware yet of the danger that had circled close enough to touch her. "Sang-hoon? Is everything I need you to leave your apartment?" he said, already moving toward his car, Hae-won matching his pace. "Now. Pack only what you need for a few days. I'm sending a car." "What's happening?" Destiny's voice sharpened immediately, sensing the gravity beneath his controlled tone. "I'll explain everything when I see you," Sang-hoon said. "Please, Destiny, I need you to trust me on this." There was a beat of silence, the sound, Sang-hoon understood, of a woman weighing 3 weeks of careful honesty against the sudden demand for total, immediate trust. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm packing now." He arrived at her apartment 11 minutes later, security detail flanking the entrance, and found her waiting by the door with a single bag, her expression tight with barely controlled fear. "Tell me," she said the moment he stepped inside. "All of it. Right now." He told her, in the car, driving toward the safe house Hae-won had already secured, about Young-sik, about the disputed shipping routes, about the particular brutal grammar of rival organizations sending messages through proximity to the people you loved, rather than direct confrontation. "He's not trying to hurt Ha-eun," Sang-hoon said carefully. "Not yet. This is a warning. A demonstration that he can reach what I protect, if negotiations don't move in his favor." "But Destiny," he paused, forcing himself to say the harder truth. "If he's identified you as someone I care about, someone connected to Ha-eun beyond simply being her teacher, you become part of that leverage too. That's the world I warned you about. This is what it actually looks like." Destiny sat very still in the back seat, processing this in the tense silence of a car moving quickly through darkened streets. "Is Ha-eun safe?" she asked finally. "She will be," Sang-hoon said, his voice hardening into something Destiny hadn't heard from him before, not the gentle, careful man from parent-teacher conferences, but something colder, more dangerous. The version of him that had built and maintained control over 3 port cities. "I intend to make sure Young-sik understands exactly how catastrophic a mistake this was." "That sounds like violence, Sang-hoon." "It sounds like consequences," he said. "There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one from the outside." They arrived at the safe house, a quiet, unremarkable property on the city's outskirts, heavily secured but disguised as an ordinary family home. Ha-eun was already there, curled up on a couch watching cartoons with a member of the security detail, utterly unaware of the danger that had circled close enough to touch her world today. She looked up when Destiny walked in, her face lighting with genuine delight. "Ms. Carter, are you having a sleepover with us?" Destiny knelt beside the couch, forcing warmth into her voice despite the fear still coursing through her. "Something like that, sweetheart." Sang-hoon watched the two of them together, his niece, and the woman who had somehow become essential to both their lives in the span of a few impossible weeks, and felt the full, terrifying weight of what he stood to lose if he failed to handle Young-sik correctly. Hae-won appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "Sir." A word. He stepped into the hallway, leaving Destiny and Ha-eun in the relative safety of the living room. "What is it?" Sang-hoon said quietly. "Young-sik sent a message 20 minutes ago," Hae-won said, holding out her phone. "Through the usual channels." Sang-hoon read the message, his jaw tightening with each word. "Young-sik, I hear congratulations are in order. A daughter. A teacher who seems quite fond of her. Family makes men predictable, Sang-hoon. I look forward to discussing the eastern shipping routes with a man who finally understands what he has to lose." Sang-hoon stared at the message, understanding with sudden, total clarity that the careful, compartmentalized life he'd built to protect Ha-eun and, now, Destiny, had just become a battlefield he could no longer keep them safely away from. "Set up the meeting," Sang-hoon said quietly, his voice carrying the particular cold finality Hae-won had learned, over years of service, to recognize as the sound of a decision already made. "Wherever Young-sik wants. Whenever he wants. I'm done letting him circle the people I love from a distance." Hae-won studied him carefully, something wary entering her expression. Sir, meeting Young-sik directly, on his terms, carries significant risk. If this is retaliation for the Eastern Route negotiations, walking into a meeting he's requested could be exactly the kind of vulnerability he's hoping to exploit. I'm aware, Sang-hoon said. But every day I don't respond, he assumes he can push further. I need him to understand, immediately and unmistakably, that circling my family invites consequences he isn't prepared for. And if it's a trap? Then we prepare for a trap, Sang-hoon said. Full security detail, neutral location, my terms on timing. But this happens soon. Hae-won. I won't have Destiny and Ha-eun living under threat while I negotiate around his convenience. He returned to the living room to find Destiny had gotten Ha-eun settled into a spare bedroom, the little girl finally drifting toward sleep despite the strange unfamiliarity of the safe house. Destiny sat on the edge of the bed, humming something low and gentle, until Ha-eun's breathing evened out completely. She met Sang-hoon in the hallway afterward, her expression exhausted but steady. She's asleep, Destiny said quietly. She thinks this is an adventure. A sleepover. Something cracked slightly in her composed voice. God, Sang-hoon, she has no idea how close danger actually came to her today. She's not going to know, Sang-hoon said firmly. Whatever happens next, I intend to keep it that way. What does happen next? Destiny asked, studying his face carefully. I heard you in the hallway, setting up a meeting. I'm going to speak with Young-sik directly, Sang-hoon said. Resolve this before it escalates further. That sounds dangerous, Destiny said, fear sharpening her voice now. You could be killed, Sang-hoon. And then what happens to Ha-eun? What happens to she stopped herself abruptly, but Sang-hoon heard the unfinished thought clearly enough. What happens to us? I've survived confrontations like this before, Sang-hoon said gentler now. I understand the risk. But the alternative, living indefinitely under the threat of him circling closer and closer to the people I love, isn't a life I'm willing to accept, for Ha-eun's sake or yours. Destiny was quiet for a long moment, wrapping her arms around herself in the dim hallway light. 3 weeks ago, she said finally, I was just her kindergarten teacher, quietly wondering if the man across the desk from me might actually be the stranger from that noodle shop. Now I'm hiding in a safe house while you plan a confrontation with a rival crime boss. She looked up at him, something raw and frightened breaking through her earlier composure. How did my life become this, Sang-hoon? I don't know how to answer that in a way that makes it feel less overwhelming, Sang-hoon admitted. I only know that whatever this has become between us, I don't regret a single moment of finding you again, even now, even with everything this world is bringing with it. Destiny studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind her exhausted eyes. I need you to survive this, she said quietly, fiercely, not just for Ha-eun. For me too. I know I said I wasn't making promises 3 weeks ago, but Sang-hoon, I think somewhere in the last 3 weeks, I started falling for you all over again. The same way I did in that noodle shop 7 years ago. And I am not prepared to lose you now. Right when I finally found you. Sang-hoon felt something in his chest loosen at her words. 7 years of careful, methodical searching finally, fully rewarded. I intend to come back to both of you, he said quietly. That's the only outcome I'm willing to accept. The meeting was arranged for 2 days later. Neutral ground, a private restaurant in Incheon's business district. Full security details on both sides. The careful choreography of 2 dangerous men attempting to resolve a conflict without triggering the kind of violence that would destabilize 3 port cities' worth of business. Sang-hoon arrived precisely on time. Hae-won and 4 security personnel positioned discreetly throughout the restaurant. Every exit accounted for. Every angle considered. Choi Young-sik was already seated when Sang-hoon entered, a broad, heavy-set man in his 50s. His expression carrying the particular confident menace of someone who'd spent decades ensuring his reputation, preceded him into every room. Sang-hoon, Young-sik said, gesturing to the seat across from him without rising. I wondered how long it would take you to respond properly, rather than hiding your family away in safe houses. You made a mistake sending someone near my daughter's school, Sang-hoon said, sitting, his voice carrying none of the warmth he reserved for Destiny and Hot Yoon, only cold, controlled precision. I'm here to make sure you understand exactly how serious a mistake that was. I sent a message, Young-sik said, unbothered, nothing more. I have no interest in harming a child, Sang-hoon. I simply wanted you to understand what real leverage looks like, given how stubborn you've been about the Eastern shipping routes. Leverage built on threatening a 6-year-old, Sang-hoon said quietly, is not a strategy I intend to reward with negotiation, Young-sik. It's a strategy I intend to ensure never happens again, by any means necessary. Something flickered in Young-sik's confident expression, the first genuine crack in his composure since Sang-hoon had sat down. Are you threatening me, Sang-hoon? I'm informing you, Sang-hoon said, that the Eastern shipping routes are no longer available for negotiation. Not because I'm unwilling to compromise on business terms, I have always been willing to compromise on business terms. But because you have demonstrated, through your actions this week, that you cannot be trusted to keep business and family appropriately separated. I don't negotiate with men who threaten children, Young-sik. I simply ensure they no longer have the capacity to do so. The restaurant went very quiet, the tension between the two men's security details thickening palpably. You're making a dangerous choice, Young-sik said slowly, ending our negotiations entirely, over a simple demonstration of resolve. I'm making the only choice available to a man who has finally found something worth protecting completely, Sang-hoon said, rising from his seat. You have until the end of this week to withdraw your operations from the Eastern routes entirely. If you don't, Young-sik, you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go to ensure my family's safety, and I promise you, it will not be a negotiation you survive comfortably. He left without waiting for a response, Hae-won and his security detail falling into step around him, the full weight of what he'd just set in motion, settling heavily over the drive back toward the safe house. And the two people waiting there who had, somehow in the span of a few impossible weeks, become the entire reason he had anything left worth fighting for. The week that followed was the longest of Sang-hoon's life. He moved Destiny and Ha-eun to a more heavily fortified property outside the city, doubled security across every location connected to either of them, and spent his days coordinating with Hae-won on contingencies, while Young-sik's silence stretched, day after day, into something increasingly ominous. Destiny watched him during those days with an expression that mixed fear and fierce, unwavering loyalty, no longer questioning whether she'd made the right choice in staying close to him, but visibly bracing herself for whatever came next. You haven't slept properly in 4 days, she said on the 5th evening, finding him in the safe house's small kitchen at nearly midnight, a cold cup of coffee forgotten beside a laptop full of security reports. I can't afford to, Sang-hoon said, not looking up. Every report needs review, every possible angle needs Sang-hoon. Destiny's voice was firm enough to make him finally look up. You're going to burn out before Young-sik ever makes a move, if he even intends to make one at all. He'll move, Sang-hoon said grimly. Men like Young-sik don't back down from an ultimatum without responding somehow. The silence isn't peace, Destiny, it's preparation. She sat down across from him, reaching over to close the laptop gently, forcing his attention fully onto her. Then, let Hae-won handle the preparation for 1 hour. Let me see you, not the version of you that's calculating threat assessments at midnight. Sang-hoon studied her for a long moment, something in his exhausted expression softening. I don't know how to be anything else right now. Not with both of you at risk because of choices I made years before either of you were part of my life. You didn't choose this world to hurt us, Destiny said quietly. You're choosing, right now, to fight for us inside it. Those aren't the same thing, even if the fear feels identical. He reached across the table, taking her hand. The first genuinely quiet moment they'd shared since the safe house became their reality. I never expected finding you again would mean putting you in danger. I never expected falling in love with a man I met once for 3 hours in a noodle shop would eventually involve a private security detail and a safe house, Destiny said, a small, tired smile breaking through her exhaustion. But here we are, Sang-hoon, and for what it's worth, I'd rather be here, frightened and uncertain beside you, than back in my old apartment. Safe, and completely unaware you existed. Song-hoon's phone buzzed on the table between them, cutting through the fragile intimacy of the moment. Hae-won's name on the screen. He answered immediately. What is it? Sir, Young-sik's operation withdrew from the eastern routes this evening, Hae-won said, her voice carrying careful, cautious relief. Completely. No contact, no counter-message, just full withdrawal, effective immediately. Sang-hoon felt something loosen in his chest, though wariness kept him from full relief. Why? That's not like him, backing down without extracting some concession first. I have a theory, sir, Hae-won said. My contacts inside his organization report significant internal disruption over the past 3 days. Apparently, several of his senior lieutenants weren't comfortable with the decision to target a child's school as leverage. There's been infighting, sir, possibly enough that Young-sik's position within his own organization has become considerably less stable than it was a week ago. You're saying his own people turned on him, Sang-hoon said slowly. I'm saying, Hae-won said, that threatening children tends to reveal exactly how far certain men are willing to go, sir. And not everyone in his organization was willing to follow him that far. Whatever the exact mechanism, the eastern routes are fully withdrawn, and my sources suggest Young-sik is currently far more concerned with internal stability than external conflict. Sang-hoon ended the call slowly, relief and disbelief tangling together as he relayed the news to Destiny, watching her face shift from cautious hope to something closer to genuine, overwhelming relief. It's over, she said quietly, like she couldn't quite believe the words as she spoke them. For now, Sang-hoon said carefully, unwilling to promise more certainty than he actually possessed. Men like Young-sik rarely disappear entirely, but the immediate threat, the one that put both of you in danger this week, that's resolved. Destiny stood slowly, crossing around the table, and Sang-hoon rose to meet her, the exhausted, careful distance they'd maintained throughout the crisis finally, fully dissolving as she stepped into his arms. I need you to know something, she said quietly, her face pressed against his chest. These past few weeks finding out who you really are, almost losing you to a meeting I was terrified you wouldn't survive, hiding in a safe house with Ha-eun, none of it changed how I feel about you, Sang-hoon. If anything, watching you fight this hard to protect us made me more certain, not less. Sang-hoon pulled back slightly, looking down at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, something unguarded, entirely without the careful control he maintained in every other part of his life. 7 years ago, he said quietly, I sat across from you in a noodle shop and thought, for 3 hours, that I'd finally met someone who made me want a different kind of life than the one I was building. Then I lost you, and I spent 7 years telling myself that moment was simply a fantasy I'd invented to survive an unbearable existence. He reached up, gently touching her face. Finding you again, watching you choose to stay through all of this, instead of running the moment things became dangerous, I don't have adequate words for what that means to me, Destiny. But I know I'm not interested in losing you a second time. Destiny's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. Then don't, she said simply. Don't lose me. I'm right here, Sang-hoon. I've been right here the entire time, even when I didn't know it was you. From down the hallway, a small, sleepy voice interrupted the moment. Uncle Sang-hoon? Miss Carter? Ha-eun stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, having woken from whatever dream had disturbed her sleep. Is the sleepover over? Can we go home now? Sang-hoon and Destiny exchanged a glance, something warm and certain passing between them. Yes, sweetheart, Sang-hoon said, crossing to scoop his niece into his arms, relief and love and exhaustion all tangled together in his voice. We're going home. All 3 of us. 3 months later, the apartment felt different in ways Sang-hoon hadn't fully anticipated when Destiny first agreed to move in, not just fuller, but warmer, the careful, guarded silence that had defined his and Ha-eun's life together, gradually replaced by something neither of them had realized they were missing. Destiny had continued teaching, insisting on keeping her position at the school despite Sang-hoon's initial concern that proximity to his world made her a permanent target. Hae-won had eventually settled the matter with a compromise: discreet, rotating security presence around the school itself, invisible enough that no student or parent ever noticed, thorough enough that Sang-hoon could finally sleep without constant vigilance. Ha-eun, for her part, had adjusted to the new arrangement with the particular effortless joy of a child who'd simply gained more love in her life without needing to understand the complicated adult mechanics behind it. "Miss Carter says I can call her Destiny now. When we're home," Ha-eun announced one evening over dinner, swinging her feet beneath the table with barely contained delight. "But at school, I still have to say Miss Carter, because that's professional." "That's very grown-up of you to understand the difference," Sang-hoon said, exchanging an amused glance with Destiny across the table. "I'm very smart," Ha-eun said matter-of-factly, returning to her rice with the total confidence of a 6-year-old entirely unaware of how much her simple, easy happiness meant to the two adults watching her. Later that night, once Ha-eun had fallen asleep, Sang-hoon found Destiny on the apartment's small balcony, looking out over the city lights, a soft cardigan wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, joining her at the railing. "I was thinking about Savannah," Destiny said quietly. "My mother's been asking when she'll finally get to meet you. I keep telling her it's complicated, but I think she's starting to suspect I'm hiding something more interesting than a busy work schedule." Sang-hoon considered this carefully. "What would you tell her? About who I am, I mean." "All of it." "I've been thinking about that too," Destiny admitted. "I don't think I need to tell her everything, not right away. But I don't want to build this relationship on the same kind of careful hiding you've spent your whole life managing, Sang-hoon. Eventually, if this is real, and I believe it is, she deserves honesty, even if it comes in careful pieces. The same way I got it from you." "I'd like to meet her," Sang-hoon said. "Properly, as myself, whatever version of myself that turns out to be, once she understands enough to make that judgment fairly." Destiny smiled, leaning into him slightly. "She's going to have a lot of questions." "I imagine so," Sang-hoon said. "I've gotten reasonably good at answering difficult questions honestly. Lately, I suspect I'll manage." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, the city stretching out below them, quieter now than it had been during the tense weeks of the Yong-sik conflict. Though Sang-hoon understood, with the particular clarity of a man who'd spent his entire adult life managing danger, that peace in his world was never permanent, only carefully maintained. But for tonight, for this moment, it was enough. "I keep thinking about that noodle shop," Destiny said softly. "How different both our lives would look if you hadn't gotten that call, if we'd actually exchanged names and numbers properly instead of losing each other to bad timing." "I've thought about that too," Sang-hoon admitted. "For 7 years actually, more than I probably should have." "Do you think we'd have ended up here anyway?" Destiny asked. "Or was losing each other, in some strange way, necessary for this to happen exactly like it did?" Sang-hoon considered the question seriously, thinking of Ha-eun asleep in her room down the hallway, of his sister's memory carried forward through the little girl who'd unknowingly reunited him with the one person he'd never stopped searching for. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I'm not interested in spending any more time wondering about the version of this story where we lost each other permanently. I'd rather focus on the version where we found each other twice, against every reasonable expectation, and I intend to make sure there isn't a third time we have to search for each other again." Destiny turned to face him fully, the city lights glowing softly behind her, 7 years and 3 impossible months collapsing into the single quiet moment on a balcony neither of them could have predicted when a rainy night in Busan first brought two strangers together. "Good," she said softly. "Because I don't intend to let you lose me again either." He kissed her then, gently, the particular unguarded tenderness of a man who had built his entire adult life around careful control, finally allowing himself something entirely, gloriously beyond his own careful management love, found twice, against every reasonable expectation, and held on to, this time, with both hands.